Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here, and welcome to part 5 of our build of the Italeri 1/24th scale Mk2 Transit Knackered Old Tranny Edition for emodels.co.uk. Right, you can see here I've got all the parts laid out, and we're ready to start the next step. If you remember in the last episode, we got all the base colour down, we blocked in the rough patches of chipping, the big sort of rough block-in areas, and we got awesome shark mouth. Yeah, everything needs a shark mouth.
Pika pika!
Now, before we get going today, and I'll explain what we're going to be doing, I need to show you something. Now, if you know me from my previous videos or my own posts on my own pages and stuff, you know my workspace traditionally was about the size of this work mat, because surrounding this work mat I had like bottles and cans of stuff and cups with pens in and brushes in and biscuit tin lids full of tools and stuff everywhere, and there was no space to make anything, and I struggled to make anything that was I couldn't make anything bigger than that without really struggling. It was so frustrating. So I had a tiny workspace. I had a big massive table but with a tiny workspace, and I was like, it drove me nuts, made filming really difficult. Anyway, thanks to the guys at eModels, I managed to get myself some, let's just say, awesome storage, and I've spent the last couple of days sorting out my desk. Look at this. Look at all this workspace. And it's because of these things. How cool is this? All these utter professional work trade storage areas. These are awesome. You have to make them yourself, a bit of wood glue, but they're awesome. What have we got? We've got thread and pin vices and sculpting tools over here. We've got milliput and lenses for my space helmet of seeing, and my tap and die set. We've got Sharpie pens, matte varnish, files, the Starship filth. I've got a lot of Starship filth. We've got all the MIG paints in the world. There's some more down there, more MIG paints. We've got Mr. Metal colours over here. You can't see them. We've got more markers. We've got tape. We've got a spinny thing. I like spinny things with more ammo paints in. We've got sanding sticks that are in use. We've got sanding sticks not being used. We've got screwdrivers and all kinds of things. And there's all my brushes and stuff over here, brushes and tools and tons. So yeah, I'm dead organised now, and I'm really excited. It's taken me about 2 days to get everything tidied up, sorted out. Now I've got much more space, so hopefully I can get a bit more interesting camera angles. I can work on some bigger projects a bit better, and I can have multiple things on the go at once, so I can have another model off to the side. So excited. So thank you to the guys at eModels for stocking these things. It's the Hobby Zone workspace organisers. They've got quite a different stock of all the different units, so go and check them out. If you're struggling with your workspace and it's basically a bomb site, get some of these things. They're really cool. And one of the cool things as well, one of the drawers has nothing in it. Why? Because I've left it like this. These are removable dividers, and this will be perfect if I'm making a model and I'm taking all the bits off the sprue. I can tidy them into here and sort them for sanding and ready for, building. And then when I'm not working on it, if I'm going to do something else for a bit, I can simply put this back in the drawer unit and it's tidied away. I love it. So this is going to be the first thing I've done in my new improved spanky workspace, which, give me a week, it'll be a bomb site again. I know it. Anyway, enough. Let me go and get everything ready, and we'll crack on for the next step. Now, for the next step, we're going to be using just 3 paints initially for the next bit of painting, and I'm going to help guys who maybe don't have an airbrush, I'm going to do as much of this kit as I can as brush painting, not airbrush painting. I know we've done some airbrush work already, but I'm going to try and do as much as I can brush painting, aside from a few bits and bobs like gloss varnish. Going to have to do that. So follow along, but we're going to stick to 3 paints initially for this bit. We're going to be using a Mk2 satin black. You can use matte black, it would be better. I just haven't got any. You can use we're going to use a Mk204 medium gunship grey, and we're going to use cold grey a Mk119. Apologies if these are out of focus or overexposed. We're just going to use those 3 colours for all the interior and for the exterior trim. So let me go and get everything ready and we'll crack on. Okay, right, let's get cracking. I'm going to paint this door liner. I've already done the dashboard and one door liner. And you can see there it's got the grey on top. I've also gone over the black bit here with some Tamiya matte black. I had some Tamiya matte black just because I want the firewall to be dark, and you're only going to see it from this angle anyway. So it's a bit untidy down at the bottom, but I'm not too fussed about that. You're never going to see that. Now, the thing to bear in mind, like I said, I'm going to be doing a lot of brush painting in this kit purely for those of you who don't yet have an airbrush or don't want to get an airbrush. You can still get excellent results with brush painting. Two things to bear in mind. First and foremost, never brush straight from the pot, or in the case of the ammo paints, never brush straight from your palette. They are very forgiving, but you will get extra brush marks and texture if you start brushing. Acrylics dry out very quickly on your palette, and so you're going to get lines and tide marks and brush marks. So always add a little bit of thinner to your paint on the palette, just a tiny bit, just to keep it flowing and nice and thin. And if you can, have a little reservoir of thinner just nearby, and every time you go to refill your brush, just touch it into the thinner and then go and mix it into the paint and get some paint. That way you're always guaranteed that your paint is nice and flowy. And also, this is brush painting. Don't expect an airbrush quality finish. You're not going to get an airbrush quality finish, not with the best intentions of the world. There will be, you can see there's some very slight brush marks on here. That's fine. We're doing a battered old vehicle, so they won't be visible once it's been weathered and beaten up. So don't panic too much if you're not getting an airbrush quality finish. You're not going to get one. So what do we need to do? We get ourselves a brush, and we've got the paint. I've added a little bit thinner to my paint, so I'm just going to go and paint that now. So let me just get some paint on this brush. Okay, so the first thing to keep in mind, like I said, is make sure your paint's a little bit thin. Also, don't expect to get perfect coverage as you knock the camera. Don't expect to get perfect coverage on your first coat. You might do. This is coming pretty close, but it's unlikely. You're probably going to need more than one coat to get a nice even coat, especially when you've primed in black. Go with smooth, slow brush strokes. Don't be dabbing it. Try and keep the brush always going in the same direction, and if you can, try to avoid going over paint you've already put on the surface. That way you minimise brush strokes even more, because if I go over this bit again now, it's had a few seconds to dry. So if I go over it, it's just going to ruck the paint up. Okay, so they've all dried now. As you can see, they've all gone nice and grey and uniform. Took a couple of coats in the end, but that's what I'm saying. You can't just slap it all on at once. There are still a few little brush marky bits, but again, like I said, expect that when you're doing brush painting. You're never going to get an airbrush finish, not with the best intention in the world. Now you can see here, I've gone ahead and picked out the black details, the hand grab and the window controls, and I'm not sure what the other one is. Probably the lock. I can't remember on these old transit vans, but they've just been picked out in Tamiya flat black. And on the dashboard, I went ahead and did some details. These are all little things that I can't really film me painting because I have to get up close and personal. I can't get the camera in. So we have picked out in flat black, we've picked out the recess where the heater control is and the buttons on the side of the console. A little bit of Tamiya flat white, and I just picked out the little symbol on the console buttons. These are like the little toggle switches, those switches, things like, I don't know, full beam or windscreen heater and things like that. I can't remember exactly what the buttons are. And they have a little symbol in the right hand side, so I put all those on there. I don't know what this little thing here is, this little sort of raised detail. All the reference pictures I have these buttons on this side, and this is either just, well, in the one I've got, it's actually a hole in the dashboard covered with a piece of gaffer tape, but so I don't really know what that is. But I'm just going to leave that, and then that'll be picked out by the washers later. Picked out the air vents in flat black. For the hazard button, which I decided was the hazard button, I just painted it in Tamiya flat red and put a little white dot because it's got a little triangle on there, and it came out kind of like a triangle. You can't really see here, but and I'm knocking the camera. Yes, of course I am. And for the heater control, I just painted a very fine line with a very fine brush, very fine line of Tamiya light blue, lightened with a little bit of yellow, like that. At one end, then I just used some Tamiya light blue, some Tamiya flat blue, just to do the blue part of the slidey thing, and then some Tamiya flat red at this end to make this is the heater control, so it goes from hot to cold. You slide it across, if you know your Fords. The foot pedals were painted in Tamiya flat black, and the bars, these were painted in the MiG satin black, a Mk2 2. Now you can see they're lumpy and bumpy. This is intentional. This is what happens when you paint straight from the pot, or in this case you put the paint from the dropper bottle on the palette and don't thin it. you can get lumps and bumps, especially with satin and gloss paint. I wanted that in this case because that's often what you get on old cars when you get these the pedal arms. They're often they're not really corroded, but the paint can be kind of bubbly. So I wanted that rough effect, and that's what we're going to do next, is put some chipping on here, because it's just paint on metal, it just comes off. I also sorted out the first layer of grey on the steering gear wheel. It's a bit messy around the bit where it joins the actual circle part, but that's going to be painted a semi-gloss or gloss black anyway, so I'm not too bothered about that. I'm not going to paint the steering column rod because you're not going to see that. So that should be painted the same grey. So what's next? Well, first of all, we need to put some chipping on here, just little tiny paint chips, and then we can move on to actually duffing this up and weathering it up. We're going to probably use washes and dry brushes to get all the colours built in, and then once the whole cockpit's assembled, we can start using things like pastels to make dust and dirt. But what we're going to do for the chipping is we're going to use some Mk2. Now this is where it gets complicated, because I've just dripped this in a load of paint. This is where it gets complicated. I've got paint on my fingers now, look. I rolled onto my palette and there's paint on my palette. Oh, darn it. It's supposed to be polished metal, but it actually got a steel 191 label on it. It came in the weapons set. So I don't actually know if it is polished metal or steel. It's kind of ever so slightly different from steel, but I can't tell if that's just me or if it's the paint. So I don't know. It's probably steel. Any metallic paint will do. So what we'll do is give it a good shake. Now I'm going to move the camera in, so let me cut here. I'm going to see if I can get a closer view for you. It's really hard for me to film close-up work, so I'm going to do my best for you. So let me do that now. Okay, right now, unfortunately the lighting on this is shocking, so it's going to look a bit pants. So let me get something to use that doesn't involve my enormous palette for one small dot of paint. I shall use this Tamiya tape dispenser. You can see I've used it before. They're kind of handy for little temporary palettes, these things. I'm going to put a little bit of the steel in there. I've shaken it really, really well. I'm going to take a really fine brush, and all I'm going to do, and because I'm just doing for paint chipping, I don't need to worry about thinning this. When you're brush painting, things like this, you don't need to worry about thinning, but it's when you're painting colours. All I'm going to do is, hopefully on camera, just pick out the edges as finely as I can. Now if I go quiet, it's because I'm doing the thinking and the concentrating and the knocking the camera. I wish I didn't have to wear this big magnifying visor. It would certainly make my life a lot more easier. So I'm just trying to do a little edge highlight here. Fine as I can, but it's really difficult on these edges. Where's the edge? There's the edge. Oops. And what I'll do is I'll just put a few little dots and dings here, kind of where, for example, the driver's foot might slip off the pedal. Or he might, you know, drop his sandwich or something. And then he's like, whoa! Or because he's a white van man, although he's not a white van, because he's a white van man, kind of put a load of paint on there, that's a bit rubbish. He's probably dropped his fag. And he's panicking and and he's slamming on the brakes and things. Or he might have dropped his copy of The Sun, you never know. So I'm just putting a few little chips in here. Now it looks a bit stark right now. That's not a problem, because as I always say, we've got lots of weathering to come, so that's cool. So that's that done. There are no other real details to paint in the cockpit, apart from we've got to do something with this bit where all the dials and things go. There's nothing else to paint on the doors. I don't think we can leave them, because they were mostly plastic, I think, anyway, if I remember rightly. All the metal bits were covered up, so they're not really going to get chipped. And the steering wheel, I think what I'll do is I'll do the weathering on the grey part, and then when that's done, I'll go back, because I'll assume it's one of those, I know it's supposed to be a soft spongy steering wheel, but in my mind I'll make it one of the old style hard plastic ones with the shiny bit, and therefore it'll be shiny black, because it always looks better. So I'll go and sort those out. When we come back, we shall start with a wash. Okay, so let's get on with the washing. Now I've mixed my own wash as I did before in the other episode. It's Tamiya flat black, a little bit of that mixed into some Tamiya German grey. The flat black is there just to obviously darken it, and the German grey is there so it's not just black. I don't just want a black wash because that's kind of boring. And I've mixed it into normal tap water instead of thinners like X20A or something, or MIG thinners, purely because if I run up the side here, you can see it's a bit gritty and bitty, which is what I'm after. I don't want a nice smooth one. I want a bit more of a gelatinous thing, I also need to find something to put it on, because I'm going to knock it over. So I'm going to stick it to my anti-Tony Fairclough spillage device. Right, okay, so it's on my spillage device, or anti-spillage device. I can't believe I'm running out of space and I've got a massive desk. Oh, let me just move some things. So, what we're going to do is put some wash on. Now, we're not going to be completely random. We'll do the doors first. Not going to be completely random, apart from on the doors. We're going to let them dry upright like that, so the wash can collect down at the bottom and just suggest a bit more dirt and grime. So what we're trying to do with this is obviously suggest dirt and grime, but also, I mean, obviously, we're going to, I'll get my thoughts together, we're going to be tinting and darkening the plastic, the paint on the plastic. That's one thing. Obviously, add some shading and shadow. That kind of is obvious. It's also supposed to suggest dirt and grime, but it's also just to suggest, you know, shadow. There's several ways you can do washes. You can do a pin wash to get it in one place, or you can focus it, you know, and focus it carefully into panel lines, or you can simply slap it all over and hope and let gravity do its work. In fact, I'm going to go quite heavy on this because I want this to be grubby. Now, we are going to bring everything back with some dry brushing, and it may take this dark grey to quite a very dark, almost black. So what I'll do is, because I've thinned this with water, I can take some water and I can start to run the water over the surface, and that will thin it as it goes. Some water over to the side, and that will help it flow. If it's not flowing very well, you could just go and get some extra water and just really sort of boost it a little bit. Now, it's a bit heavy there, so I'm going to take the brush and suck some of it up, and what you'll see is hopefully that will start to make everything move around a bit. Okay, right, that's had a little while to dry, and as you can see, it's looking much darker now. A little bit scruffy around the edges, but that's absolutely fine. It's toned down the metal on the sort of pedal arms a bit more, so they're looking a bit cooler. I keep dropping things all the time. It's brought some shading around the buttons. Hasn't quite removed my little tiny white dot, although it's made it harder to see, but I'm proud of those little white dots. And as you can see, it's darkened the door panels quite nicely as well. Now, the next step is to go from that to this. Now, there may not seem to be much difference to the naked eye straight away, but this has been dry brushed and it's faded the black a little bit, brought some sort of life back to it, and it's also toned down the handles, so they look very similar, but they're still a bit darker. Have I done that? Dead simple. I used exactly the same grey colour that we painted with, and I'm just going to dry brush over that now. And as always, it's just a case of get some of the paint on the brush, get it on a piece of tissue, get most of it off thusly. And the reason we can go back to using the original colour is because of course I was all southern then, because of course the original colour is now darker because we've washed it. So what we can do is just go over with the same colour again, the one we originally had, and it'll be much lighter. And all we're going to do is build up very slowly a blend between the dark washed parts and the bits that we're now dry brushing. And I'm being very gentle, I'm not pushing down much at all. I don't want to put too much paint on, and I don't want to go too heavy. You can of course vary how much you put on there, depending on what effect you want to achieve. But I'm kind of just focusing really on the middle of panels. Okay, whilst all that is drying, it's time to move on to the next step, which is the furniture. And as you can see, I've made a start on the chairs. We have, where I've made some little rips in the foil to suggest rips in the vinyl, I've painted in some of the foam underneath, just blocked it in for the moment with the base colour, and that's just Mk2 Dunkelgelb. It's quite a nice colour, quite a good colour for foam. So that's just blocked in. So what we need to do first of all, and I've done that, is just paint in the main leather or the vinyl colour. So for that I'm going to use exactly the same as before, the same sort of mix of grey that we used on the rest of the dashboard and stuff, but I'm going to add a little extra white this time just to lighten it a bit, because the seats never quite match the dashboards. The dashboards were always grey or various colours, but you know, mostly grey, but the seats aren't always guaranteed to match, and I'm not going to be painting a tartan pattern on there, trust me. And again, as before, we're going to add a little bit of thinner to this, just to thin it ever so slightly, because we don't want to go in full whack with a big coat straight away. We want to build it up in more than one coat if we have to. So let's go. Now I'm going to just slap it on most of it. And again, it may take a couple of coats. And again, it most likely will have brush marks. Now you can see here it is quite a thin coat, but that's fine. I intend to build it up. So I'm not fussed if it's a bit translucent right at this moment. Let's get some more paint on there. And again, we're just going to go in slow movements. We're not going to slap it on particularly vigorously. Take our time. And it does look a little bright, but it will actually darken once we get washes and things on here. Now when it comes to the bits where the rips are, I'm going to stay away from those a bit, because I'm going to go in with a smaller brush for that. But for the moment, I'm just going to work my way around as best I can, and on camera. So let me go and finish the seat, the first coat. And I might, as I probably end up doing 2 or 3 coats. So let me go and find a better brush, because this one is clearly spannered. Look at the state of that. I'll go and find a better brush and I'll carry on. When we come back, we'll have painted this base coat and we can move on to the next step. So, back in a moment. Okay, now for the next step. However, before we go anywhere, I need to educate you. Something I learned last night. Now, bear in mind, I haven't brush painted for 25, 30 years. When I was a kid, I used to use brushes all the time. When I was an adult, well, not an adult, but when I came back into the hobby, of course, I got myself an airbrush. And right now, all I tend to do is use brushes for details and things, like when I did the shark mouth and stuff. I don't use them that often. You may have noticed in the last few clips I was struggling a bit with the brushes. That's because these brushes, my brushes, look like that. These are supposed to be tipped brushes, like pointy tipped. Yeah, this one's all kind of flat at the end and this one's all ponytail type. Yeah, this is called splaying, and I did some research last night, because these are new brushes, these are only a couple of weeks old, to find out what causes this, and it's basically me being a dumbass. What happens is, when you paint, if you get paint down here at the ferrule, where the ferrule meets the bottom of the bristles, it's really hard to get out, and when it goes in, it dries and it pushes all the bristles apart at the base. So if you get your bristles like that, and you get paint in there, and it goes and spreads them all out like that and dries, and it's really hard it's almost impossible to get out. So basically I ruined my brushes. Now I was lucky last night. I've got a load of brushes that I was sent by an American manufacturer a couple of years ago, I can't remember why. So I've got a load of brushes there that I can use, and I went and got some new brushes today. But the trick is, when you're working with brushes, when you're mixing paints, getting them from jars and pots and things and mixing them on the palette, use a crappy old brush to get them out of the pots, to mix them on the palette. And then when you're using the actual paint brushes to do your painting, get the brush, get it in the palette, but only get paint halfway up the bristles, or yeah, somewhere up the bristles, but not at this end. Don't get paint here if you can avoid it. The longer you can keep paint away from this end, the longer your brush will keep its point, and not all the bristles won't be splayed apart and things like that. So these are now useless for anything specific. They'll just become old brushes I'll have in the background in emergencies, a bit like this one which we're about to use. I've had this brush for about 35 years and it's old and knackered. You can see it's got like crust of crap in there, because when I was little I used to just get paint on the brush and paint. I didn't care, I didn't know. Now I know, so I learned that last night. So look after your brushes, get paint halfway up the bristles but no further if you can avoid it. Now the next step, all the seats are now painted, hooray! And you can see, because the problems with the brushes I was having, it's not the best finish in the world, but that's fine, it's because it looks shiny. I also did some dry brushing on the dashboardings. It looks a bit cartoony, but this next step should hopefully bring all that together. What we're going to do is we're going to make another wash, but this time we're going to do it slightly differently. We're going to use Tamiya Smoke X19, and we're going to use some normal thinners. I'm going to use Ultimate Airbrush Thinner, but Tamiya X20 is fine. Or you can use your isopropyl alcohol, whatever you want to use. Don't use this on Gunpla, it will eat your Gunpla alive. But for any other kit, you're fine. Now I've made a little wash here with just the smoke. So it's very thin. It's only maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 brushfuls in the thinner. And it's just enough to give it a slight tint. Now the reason I've used this with thinners and not just with water is because I want this to pool and I want it to be controlled by gravity. So dead easy. All we're going to do is take a crappy old brush, because I'm not really bothered, I'm not going to get brush marks. Give it a good stir, make sure it's all mixed up, and I'm just going to slap it on like this. And and you can see it gives a slight dirty tone. Now, smoke is often used by people making things like motorbikes, airbrushed on, to give that heat staining effect on chrome exhausts. It has a myriad of uses. You can make it into washes, you can use it neat, you can do all kinds of things, but I love using this as a wash, a thinned wash, because it does pool so well. You can see it gives you really, I don't know if it'll be in focus, I'm trying to keep it straight, but it has this wonderful pooling quality. Now I can't really get it straight and be on the camera at the same time and in focus. So I'm going to really slap it on the back as well, because I want this to look dirty, like years of accumulated, let's just be honest, man butt sitting on the chair, ingraining dirt. Okay, right, that's had about an hour to dry, and as you can see, it's not quite gone according to plan. The smoke has dirtied up the seat a little bit, but not much. But it's also collected in the gap at the back here and made a big black line. I'm not bothered about the shine, because it's a gloss colour. That would go when you matte varnish it. But it's kind of a big black stripe. However, not a problem, because I have a way to rectify this. I was going to do this anyway. And what I'm going to do is this. It's going to get mucky up even more, because ultimately everything you do as a model maker can be changed and tweaked. There's no rule that says the seat has to be this colour, and this just looks like a dirty, grubby, filthy seat. It won't really be in focus, but it looks grubby and filthy and really quite dubious, and I wouldn't want to sit in that. So how did I do that? And remember, this is still shiny. Once this is matte, it'll just look like a weird, dirty, filthy seat, and we might do highlights over the top, or we might not. How am I going to do that? Well, it's a welcome return to my favourite paint in the whole world, Starship Filth. Yeah, Starship Filth for ages. Dead simple. Get a bit on the brush. It's off camera, but I've got a bit of tissue here, so I like with the dry. In fact, I'll do it on camera. Just going to dry brush it to get most of the paint off. I'll do it off camera, so I'm not just waving it in your face. So I've got most of the paint off now. Dead simple. All we're going to do is just work it into the corner, and it will blend in with that smoke. If I do it on camera, it'll blend, because it's a similar sort of colour. It'll blend in and start to fade that, and what I'll do then is work my way up that way to grub up the rest of the seat. So there you go. Even I make mistakes sometimes. Things I do don't always work out, but it's just how you get around that. My option was basically to either repaint the whole seat, which I didn't really want to do because there's enough paint on there as it is, and it's kind of thick. Just cleaning my brush off. It's kind of a thick layer of paint. I didn't want to do it anymore because it would just obscure even more details. So I figured, well, why not? Let's just adapt and change. One thing I do need to do is go in and just touch in those bits of foam that are sticking out, just to make them bright again. So I'll probably do that while this is drying. I'll just go in and touch in the Dunkelgelb into there, and that should look nice and bright. So anyway, let me go and let these dry and do the other bits, and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, right, whilst all the interior parts are waiting for a matte varnish and for the decal on the dashboard and steering wheel, it's time to move on to the outside again and the next step. Now, before we go anywhere, I need to show you something I've done. I have sorted out the rubber seal around the windows. You can see on the doors there, and on the back as well. Now, I didn't film this because basically it was me with my face stuck right in it, and there's various different ways you can do the painting of the rubber trim, but you need to make sure you keep nice straight lines around the edges. Now on this kit it's not too bad because it's got some nice sculpting on there and there's some quite crisp edges. However, you know, you can paint it on. Some people use pens. You could mask it off and spray it, but I'm far too lazy, and the best way I found to do this, to get that sort of perfect rubber trim look, is simply to use thin down black paint, or whatever colour you want to use. Really thin it down and go round. It should, because it's thinned, it should adhere and conform to all the little edges here. You can just get the brush, get yourself a fine brush. It needs to be a fine brush. Get some of the thinned paint, overload it a little bit, and just very slowly run the brush along. You can splay it out a bit as you push down to get it to fit, and it will follow that curve. And the first coat will be almost invisible. You may need 3 or 4 coats or more to build up the darkness, but once you've done a few, bam, you're sorted. It's done. And that's the best way I've found to paint really crisp rubber trim around windows and cars. It took me a long time to figure that out. Years and years I avoided doing cars because of that. Especially around here where it's really fine engraving for the little lip. The thinned paint just works really well. So it's almost like a wash, but just slowly build it up. Go around slowly and slowly build it up, and you'll get black trim. And that's what I've done. So I've got a nice crisp edge there, and that'll all disappear when we do the weathering. We need to get all this ready so we can apply a matte coat for the next stage. So what we need to do is get various bits of the weathering done first. That's basically things like the trim I've already painted and the rust chipping. Now we blocked in the base rust, as you can see, we did that. The next step is to get a little bit finer and a little bit more detailed, and for that you're going to need an sponge, or a piece of an sponge or an foam. We're going to do some foam chipping, and this couldn't be easier. What we're going to do, I'm going to start with the dark colour and work my way up to lighter, and also try and get some words in my sentences. Might be a good idea. I'm going to start with Shadow Rust, Mk2. I think that's the darkest one. Yeah, we've got 3 colours. Mk2, Shadow Rust, Mk912, Red Brown Shadow, and then Red Brown Base, Mk913. And they're all basically different shades of red brown, rust colours as you like to call them and I like to call them. And all I need to do is quite simply get my bit of sponge. It's kind of rough around the edges because I just pulled it off the block of sponge. I think this came from a wristwatch foam packing. It needs to be rough. Going to dip it in some paint. You can get quite a bit. Got it in the paint. Then we're going to, like a dry brush, get most of that back off on some tissue until we're only getting the odd spit and spot. That's enough. And then quite simply, it couldn't be easier, work around the rust spots. And I'm not going to be dabbing and jabbing, I'm just going to be touching very carefully as I'm knocking cameras, touching it to where I want the rust to be. And I'm hardly putting on any pressure at all. I'm also dropping it, which is always a good win. Hardly any pressure at all. You might not even see it, but hopefully what you can see is it just starts to add little brown speckles here and there, and this is just to start breaking up this rust colour and start adding a bit of a fade between the rust colour I've already put on and the blue paint, because I don't want it to be these sharp crisp edges that the masking fluid left us. I do want some patches of rust where it's just this, like for example up here where I've got some stuff there but I didn't put any chipping on it. Let's just add some chipping now, just a bit here. So we've got some patches, but it's important to kind of vary it so it's not all just one colour of brown. Rust is all various different colours. So you can see there, we're kind of fading it slightly, softening the edges. So, I'll focus around the front here where you might get quite a bit of rust. And I might go over some of this black trim, but I can go back over that again later with the black, it's not a problem. But you can use it to just fade like that. So I'll go off and do all that. So I'll start with the Shadow Rust. I'll work my way up through the red brown shadow and then to the red brown base. And I say the lighter the colour gets, the less I'll use it. So it'll just be here and there for the very light colours. Okay, so while the rust is drying, it's time to sort out the trim. And if you look at old Fords, you know that they start off with black plastic or metal covered in black paint, and that black paint and plastic basically fades to grey over the years. And where it's metal underneath, like on the bumper, it goes rusty. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over this like we did with the dashboard with a dry brush this time, a dry brush of the grey mix we had last time, just to catch the edges and sort of gently colour it, give a little bit of patchiness because these plastics are often quite rough. Then we'll go over with the dark wash, probably 1 or 2 coats just to get right into the recesses, bring it back again. And then once that's done and that's all dried, we'll go over with the sponge rust on the, mostly on the bumper actually. We'll go through rust spots at the bottom, working them way up to the top. So it starts as a sort of dark grey patchiness at the top and fades to sort of rusty brown at the bottom. I won't show you the whole process because you've seen me do it all, but I'll show you the dry brushing. Okay, so we're going to take our big dry brush, get some of the paint on the brush as always, get a big chunk of it off on tissue. Not too much though, not as much as normal, perhaps a little bit less. And then all we're going to do is go in quite easily and dry brush over the top. I'm going to go from top to bottom, because often what we'll do is when we do the rust and when you get some streaking and stuff on these things, it often goes from top to bottom or bottom to top. And so we're going to do wash, isn't it? I've got quite a lot of paint on here. It is actually thicker than I would normally have it. It's not quite a dry brush, but it's almost a dry brush. But that's exactly the effect we're looking for. If I can get around this wooden stick. Okay, so it only needs to be very subtle. I say, well, not subtle, but very slight. It doesn't need to be all grey, it doesn't need to be all black. That's what we've got there. We're left with this kind of patchy grey with some streaky black bits, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So let's do the bumper. Die Bumper gefahren. Again, we're going to go over this with a lot of rust anyway, so it's not the end of the world. So it's not quite a dry brush. It's just a light brush, I suppose. I don't really know what you call it. It's not quite dry brushing, but it's not painting either. So, when we come back, I'll show you the bumpers. I'll show you all the bits on there. And then it'll be off to matte varnishing, and we'll get that bit done. And then that'll be it for this episode, I think. Okay, so all that rust blending has now been done, and as you can see, it's looking a lot more natural now. Not fully natural. We've still got some work to do later on, but it's looking a lot less like stuff I've painted on the surface and more like actual rust and fading and paint spackling. Looking pretty good. There is more weathering to come, like I say, and that will help blend this even more and make it look more realistic. But I'm still thinking that looks pretty good. So anyway, that's been done. We're almost ready to go with the matte varnish. There's one last stage, but I have also gone ahead and added the decals. You can see I put the license plate and the front badge on. I have installed the interiors of the doors, put the license plate on the front bumper, and I've put the dials on the dashboard and the little badge in the middle of the wheel. I actually dropped this and the wheel snapped off the steering column, so I've had to glue it on. Oh! Now you might be wondering, why have I put these decals on over the rust? Reality is, for a lot of old vehicles, these were just plastic stick-on things glued onto the body of the car. They weren't metal typically, or if they weren't rusty metal. So it makes sense that the metal would rust, but these plastic stick-on things would remain intact. They'll still get covered in dirt and grime when the whole vehicle gets weathered, but they wouldn't be rusty. And I've also glued the seats in and put some metal chipping on the legs. So I also, you won't have seen me do it, but I painted the details on the handbrake, painted the little thing at the front red, and I painted the rest of the handbrake was the satin black with some chipping. The gear stick was satin black for the stick with some chipping on it, and then the sort of grip, the gear knob, was the grey we've used before with a little bit of highlighting on it, and that's that. So what's next? Oh, one other thing. I'm a nerd and I look these things up. I looked up this license plate to see if it's real. It's not, because the final digit should be a letter, not a number. So I thought, I wonder if C469BFB exists. I'm assuming they can't use a real license plate. So I looked up C469BFB. That exists. It's a transit van made on the 1st of December 1985. It's green, or it was green when it was made. It was made and first registered in Bristol, or near Bristol. And it was last MOT'd in 2011, and since then it's had a standard off-road notice, it's been sawned, it's signed as not on the road. So theoretically, if they've just changed that last one so it's not a real number, this van actually exists in real life somewhere. Somebody knows where this van is, or the one that's the closest to this license plate. So if you know where C469BFB, a transit van, possibly green, probably knackered, is, probably on someone's driveway, drop us an email. Drop me an email, let me know, or stick a comment on this video. Be interesting to see a photograph of the actual van. Anyway, what's the next step? Well, there's just one more thing to do before we go for a matte varnish and crack on with the weathering, and that is to add some little highlights to some of these rust chips. Now, we're not going to be adding a rust highlight. What we want to suggest is that the paint is raised up off the rusty surface. And what we want to do is suggest that the light comes down, catches the paint, and where the paint is sticking out, the light just catches it. Now, we're not going to do many, but what I've done is I've mixed a little bit of the Tamiya flat blue and some Tamiya flat white. I'll just get some paint on the brush and I'll show you. And as you can see, we've got this wonderful, hopefully light blue colour. It's lighter than the base colour. And what we're going to do is quite simply put on some highlights. And I'm going to go exclusively at the bottom of paint chips. I hope this comes out on camera. The bottom of paint chips, and just with some tiny little dots. And all this is to do is just to suggest a raised edge. It's just to suggest that the light is coming from above, shining down on the paint, and the paint is sort of stuck up a little bit and catching that light. Now you can do as much or as little as you want, and it may look a bit extreme right now. It does look a bit exaggerated, but when you're making models at scale, you always want to exaggerate things a little bit anyway, just so the eye can pick them out. And as well, don't forget, like I said, we've got lots of weathering to come on top of this, so this will fade away and blend in much better once all the weathering goes on top. So there's no harm in being a bit over the top right at the start. So I need to go around and do this on all the big paint chips I can find. You could do something similar on the top with a darker colour to suggest a shadow from the paint on top of the rust, but I'm just going to do a light colour here and there. I started one here, but the film didn't come out, and that's quite subtle. And I'll probably do ones in odd places, just where the paint meets the rust, not at the top, but just at the bottoms, at the bottom of little bits of paint, things like that. So I shall go and get all those done, and then when we're ready for matte varnishing then, and then that'll be this episode complete. So I'll go and get this done. Back in a moment. Okay, right, the matte varnishing has been done. Yes, it's all been sprayed. Now I did try and film it, but for some reason today I had a ton of issues with my airbrush compressor and the matte varnish. I was using the Ammo by Mig matte varnish. You can see it there, maybe if it's in shot. For some reason I was just having a lot of flow issues today. I don't know if it's the airbrush or something else that was going a bit wrong. Consequently, everything's been matte varnished, but there's a few bits that are still a little bit shiny, like the chassis there. The dashboard's still a little bit glossy. Now that would dull down once I start doing weathering on it, but what I'm going to do, let this dry for a few hours, and as it's a nice day outside, I can hear a blackbird outside my room, and I love the sound of blackbirds. Oh, waking up to the sound of blackbirds outside is the best thing ever. I don't know where I'm going with that. What I'll do is, in a little while, I'll just quickly give it a blast over with some Humbrol 49 rattle can matte varnish, just to tamp down any residual shininess. Now I did notice a special moment. I took great pains, because the license plate on this bumper goes around a certain way, and it only fits a certain way. And I took real great pains to make sure that I had the decal the right way up on the bumper, on the registration plate, before I put the registration plate in. And I was like, is it the right way around? Yes. Are the buttons, the little tabs on the right side? Yes. Is it upside down? No. Right, let's go. Just push it in. Brilliant. Fortunately, I was actually holding the bumper upside down. Now, luckily, I haven't glued this in. I just pushed it in because it's quite a tight fit. There's a few bits on this kit that are actually a tight enough fit. You could consider them snap build. So, yeah, I've got to take that out and put it back up again. So I have actually got the little pegs now in the wrong place. So what I'm going to do is take the license plate out, snap the pegs off, and then just glue it on. And I might glue it on a bit wonky, like it's been dinged and falling off. Or I'll see if I can leave one of the pegs on just for security. Yeah, I goofed. I don't know. I'm dead special, mate. What can I say? I checked it about 1,000,000 times as well before I did the decal on that. Teach me not to put the plate on the bumper first. I don't know. You can see now everything's been matted on the bodywork, and I only went round in a few subtle places with the little, I don't know if it'll come out, with the little highlights, just here and there, a few little places. I also did the same with the red and with the black. With the red, I just went over with a red with some yellow added to brighten up a little bit, and with the black, just a very light grey. Just try and pick out some areas, some edges, but again, they're only very subtle and you can't actually really see them. So, but that came out quite nice, and it's really sort of, most people won't even notice it, and once it's been weathered, they probably won't ever see it. So that's going to do it for this episode. When we come back, we'll start on the weathering in earnest. I need to get some products and stuff for the diorama, and I need to figure out something for the wing mirrors. I haven't touched those yet because I've not figured out how I'm going to do those. But in the next episode, we'll crack on with the weathering. I have decided, I did a few experiments with tyres, and getting a flat tyre effect, it didn't work. So what I'm actually going to do is keep the tyres as they are, but I'm going to make them look like the guy, whoever's selling this, because this is going to look like it's for sale. Whoever's selling this has gone to all the effort of replacing the tyres, and that's it. Look, it's a brilliant van because it's got brand new tyres. There you go. So we'll be leaving the tyres as is, and I'll be making them look a bit new. So in the next one, we'll start the weathering. We'll see how far we can get with that. And then as soon as that's all done, we can crack on with the diorama then. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. So I need to get the bits for that. But it just remains for me to say thank you for watching. It's been a bit of a long episode, so apologies. We've done little bits and not massive amounts, so there you go. But thank you so much for watching. As always, obviously, do pop along to emodels.co.uk. Absolutely fantastic online store. You know them already, most likely. But pop along, check out their stock. They've got everything you could ever need. Kits, tools, paints, everything you want. Everything I've used is available from the old emodels.co.uk. And as I always say, if they haven't got it, you don't need it, because they'll have a ton of other things exactly the same or just as good that you can try instead, as I knock that little bit of bumper. But if there is something there that maybe they haven't got and you really want that specific thing, just drop them a line. I'm sure they can probably, try and get it in stock for you. Won't be a problem at all. They're happy to try and help you out. If there's something very, very specific you need, drop them a line and say, hey, can you get this for me? They probably will be able to. And go along to their Facebook page, facebook.com/eModelsLTD. It's a wonderful little group. Loads of people hang out there, post up pictures of their works, where they're up to with their builds. Have a good time. It'll also keep you up to date with any special offers, new stock that's come in. I'll let you know on there. And also, Ted and I do a live stream, typically every Monday around about 8 o'clock or so. And it'll post up on there when that's due and what offers or giveaways perhaps we might be doing in the live stream on the YouTubes. And as always, check out my stuff. I'm Model Making Guru on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. But just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Stay tuned for the next one. And until we see you next time, go make something awesome. Go be awesome. Adios, amoebas.